Good morning. Good morning, Danny.
And we will be talking today. Our topic today is Witness to a Persecution, which is the new book that you wrote. And just a couple of words about you before we'll start. So you're the VP Secretary and Trustee of the Milken Family Foundation. Richard was the personal attorney and lifelong fan of Michael Milken, who represented Michael in the 1986 federal investigation and prosecution of Drexel Burnham Lambert and its high yield and convertible bond department, the department Michael created and was the head of. In his new book, Witness to a Prosecution, Richard discusses Michael, who he describes as the most successful and innovative financier of his time, and Drexel, an upstart investment bank, the most successful securities firm on Wall Street, thanks to Michael. Led by Drexel, the high-yield bond market grew rapidly from the end of the 1970s, from $70 billion to well over 2.5 trillion in 2022, which made Michael and Drexel attractive targets. In his book, Richard explains basically everything that went on there and some things that would shock people, and I think gives a new angle of information to that episode, and we will talk about that today. Richard is the executive vice president of the Milken Family Foundation, a partner at American Sandler law firm, which is a family business firm. I believe your father started that firm. Um, um, and specializing in business restructuring and acquisition, securities, transactions, and real estate. A veteran investor, he's overseen partnership investments in securities, business transactions, and various real estate projects, serves on a number of nonprofit and for-profit boards, past chair of the Jewish Federations of North America, still a very prominent contributor to the Federation, Los Angeles Jewish Federation, and Milken Community High Schools. Holds a bachelor degree, magna cum laude from University of California, Berkeley. And there's so much more to mention when I'm speaking about you, but we'll make it. But we have to start at some point, and I doubt we'll get to even part of the questions that we have here today. So, good morning. You're in Los Angeles.
I am this morning, and that sounded in a very impressive biography there. It's just a function of getting older. The older you get, the more things you can add.
And yeah, so you're the right hand man of Michael, a friend of the family since forever. You guys grew up together, and you wrote this book that I was very much enjoyed reading, Witness to a Prosecution, the myth of Michael Milken, which is basically talking about what the media and the government really made out of Michael, which kind of demonized him really. And what you're basically saying is that what we think when we hear his name and what we were taught to believe in is not really what was going on. So first of all, what made you, after all these years, decide that you want to now write this book?
Good question. As because of the timing of it, I've been thinking about this a long time, Danny. We went through a very, very difficult period, one that none of us ever dreamed we would ever experience in our lifetime, back in the 1980s and early 1990s. As a result of which a lot of misconceptions and misinformation were put out at the time about Mike. And after we sort of put this period somewhat behind us, we never got it really totally behind us. I found that the same lies and misinformation, Michael Milken went to jail because of insider trading, which couldn't be farther from the truth, kept getting repeated over and over again. And I finally said, the books that were written at the time are not credible in that they are not accurate. They're well written, they're good stories, they just are not accurate. And Mike remains a public figure. He's very involved still in especially philanthropic endeavors for which he's well known. He's sought out by many people. And people should know the truth. They don't know the truth. And I do, because I lived it. That's why the name of the book is Witness. I'm the witness to the prosecution. I was there. I worked on it every single day for many, many, many years. So I just felt it was time for the truth to come out. And I actually taught a class at Stanford Law School about 10 years ago with a friend of mine, David Mills, a professor there, on the subject to gather my thoughts and get myself organized. And just because I wanted to write the book, and quite frankly, when COVID happened and I was home so much, I had the time to sit down and write the book. So the same book could have been written 10, 15 years ago, but it's still relevant today because it's not just about Mike, Danny. It's also about how the process worked, a process I did not understand at the time. And I think most people I've encountered don't understand today of what the tremendous power the government has in a criminal prosecution. So I thought it was relevant for people who could come under the same kind of intense scrutiny that we came under to understand what it's about. And for those that are interested in how it affected this individual and what really happened to him, it's important for the truth to be out there.
And what's the response you're getting so far? Because people, will say, oh, the other books, the other stuff that came on this topic was written by journalists and by real research. Well, you are biased. You are all, he's a wealthy guy, you're a wealthy guy, you were there together. You are obviously biased, and then you write a book to prove otherwise. Didn't people come to you saying, hey, Richard, you know, just giving you that kind of approach, or you haven't seen that?
Well, I say in the first, you know, Danny, in the first two pages of the book, I indicate my relationship with Mike, how far it goes back, and where I'm coming from. And I indicated the fact that all of these books are written by people, by human beings. People are complicated. People have agendas. So, do I have an agenda? Yeah. My agenda is the truth. Just because they're written by journalists doesn't mean they're accurate. Journalists too have an agenda. Okay. They're trying to tell a story, they're trying to get attention to the story they're telling. At that time, the interesting story was the government story. The government started this prosecution of Mike Milken because of other cases they were involved in at the time. And the people that were writing about it they actually had an interest in Mike being guilty and that story being true, and that's the story they told. I'm telling the story of what happened. Those that have read the book have been come back to me, and it's been very satisfying because I didn't know how people would react to the book. But my book's based on facts. It's based upon court documents. What I say, I have the judge who decided the case, what she said in court and in official documents. I invited the prosecutor, the line prosecutor in my of the case, to my class at Stanford. So I quote what he said about the process and how it works. I invited the SEC head of enforcement at the time to the class. He talked about it. So this isn't just my opinion, Denny. This is a factual description of what actually happened by the only person that has ever written about what happened who actually was there and experienced it firsthand.
And I have to maybe quote a couple of reviews that I read here. And I think one of the biggest problems, obviously, is the damage that was done. And like you say, people remember the headlines, and the headlines were made by what you describe as a government that was really out to get him no matter what, and media that was having a ball by writing about that and finding a villain in the story. And that's what people remember. And to change their mind is not easy, which is why I think even reading here from the Wall Street Journal, the same paper where Stewart was writing for Den of Thieves, we'll talk about it later on, that gave a lot of, that was part of this ordeal. And she writes here, I think it's she, the author tells a convincing and concerning story of how the government targeted a largely innocent man, and when presented with proof of that innocence, refused to turn away from a bad case. I've always been more than a bit skeptical about Mr. Sandler's underlying thesis and the thesis of many of Mr. Milken's supporters on this page. After all, Mr. Milken served nearly 2 years in jail, pleaded guilty to 6 felonies, and paid a large fortune to settle with the government. But at the end of the day, he writes here that it actually changed his mind completely about what was going on back then. So that was one. And the other one that I wanted just to read another review says the book devotes considerable time to arguing that the criminal justice system in the US is unfair. It decries so much power being in the hands of the government and that convictions are prioritized over justice. This is a review of the book by Carolina Susi. Milken is used as a case study indeed. The DOJ continued adding charges to his list even after reaching a plea deal with him. Less sympathetic, okay, that's not really interesting here, but my point is that both reviews actually were convinced that the story was different than what they knew before. So maybe the first question is which you explain in length is why him, and why were they so out to get him no matter what? At every stage, it seems like Milken was a target that they really wanted to nail down.
So in many ways, it was a perfect storm against Mike. Mike was highly successful on Wall Street. He created an industry within an industry that didn't exist, the high yield credit industry. So that existed before Mike got to Wall Street, but studies that Mike did in college and graduate school showed him that bonds, but we'll go backward a little bit. All bonds that are issued to the public have a rating. They're rated by either Moody's or Standard and Poor's. And the rating, if you want to get as high a rating as possible. If it's triple B or better, it's considered an investment grade rating. Okay, those are investment grade companies. You're talking about less than 2%, maybe 1% of all the companies in the United States that have an investment grade rating. When a company gets an investment grade rating and then maybe gets in trouble, has some financial problems, it gets re-rated, the bonds get re-rated, and they'll usually sell at a discount because of the risk that the company may default and not pay interest or principal when it comes due. Mike's study showed that the bonds that lost their rating or became what is called high yield rating, no longer investment grade rating, that those bonds actually performed better than the risk that you would assume with the discount that they traded at. So he got very interested in the idea of looking at bonds that did not have investment grade rating and to studying how he could put together a portfolio or invest in those bonds that had the greatest chance of making payments of principal and interest when they're due. As we all know, a bond's very different than a stock. If I like a stock and no one else in the market likes a stock and the company does well, it's still going to sell at a very low price to earnings ratio. So it won't do as well as I think it should. A bond, on the other hand, is a contract. A bond is a contract. Company makes a contract. It's borrowing money. It will pay interest on certain dates and principal as long as it's able to do that. If I'm right about the bond and the market is wrong about it, I could buy it at a substantial discount and I'll get paid and I'll make a great return. So Mike determined that if he studied, if he worked hard, if he did research of companies, of industries, if he met the principals, the managers of the companies, then he could identify those companies that sold at discount that he thought had great value. And his theories proved true. So he went to Drexel Burnham from Wharton, where he went to business school. And he chose Drexel Burnham because it was a top research firm on Wall Street. And at the time, I think it was called Drexel Firestone. In fact, I think it later merged and became Drexel Burnham Lambert. But he went to that firm not because it was the most prestigious firm, because it hardly was, but it was the best research firm. And he felt research is the foundation to investing, because the foundation of research means that you could reduce your risk by the knowledge that you gain. And he started investing in these bonds for Drexel and making tremendous returns, and started going out to other investors, insurance companies, pension funds, large investors, and explaining to them his theories and they started opening accounts with Drexel and also trading in bonds. So he sort of created a trading operation that was very successful. So in the late 1970s, Drexel started to do that which had not done before, which was issue bonds, original issues for companies that could not get investment grades. So companies such as Turner, Ted Turner's company, Steve Wynn in Las Vegas, Whole Homes, Craig McCaw in cellular. These are individuals who were creating new industries, had new ideas, and most investment ratings were based upon history and historical. Mike was looking to the future. The rating agencies were looking to the past. And by doing that, he provided financing for companies to grow that actually provided over 100% of all job growth in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and started to develop quite a business there, had a large trading operation, was trading literally billions of dollars of these bonds because he made a market in everything that they issued, and was starting to get a lot of attention. And Wall Street did not like this disruptor who was doing all this business that they couldn't do, that they couldn't compete with. And then some of the people, the entrepreneurs that Drexel was financing, when they saw value in established companies, even companies that had investment grade rating that they thought were undervalued, Drexel, if they believed in those ideas, would finance those individuals to try to acquire those established companies. And if the companies did not welcome that acquisition, then it became known as a hostile takeover. And those companies complained to Congress, they complained to the SEC, they complained to their investment bankers on Wall Street that who is this guy? What are these high yield securities? What is going on here? How could they come after my company? And there were a lot of bills in Congress trying to attack this. So you had this individual who was not liked in the industry, that was doing things that were perfectly legitimate, but they was doing it within an unregulated part of an unregulated industry. And he was an attractive target. And he did business with an individual who was the most revered risk arbitrager of his time, Ivan Boesky, who probably was not probably, was the largest buyer and seller of equity securities at the time, with accounts with every major firm on Wall Street. And he met Boesky. Boesky did some business with Drexel. And Ivan Boesky turned out to be an insider trader. He pled guilty because he was found out to be buying non-public, confidential information. And in doing that, he was violating the securities law, and he made a deal with the government when he pled that he would cooperate with the government and help them make cases against other prominent people. And the most prominent name he gave them was Michael Milken. So you had this attractive target. You had a guy saying, I could help you convince him, get him out of the business. And they made a fantastic deal with Mr. Boesky in exchange for his agreement to cooperate. So you had this attractive target. You had this individual who said, I could help you get him, and the process began.
And just before we continue with the story, part of I think how he's described wherever he is as you can see, even when Trump pardoned him, and we'll get to that, was, as you know, junk bond king, which is doesn't sound very positive when you look at it that way. And I just want to mention some of those junk bonds, because I don't think people realize what we're talking about. Back then, there were companies that couldn't get attention from anybody. Today, you might know some of them. KB Homes, Viacom, Time Warner, Cablevision, Telemundo, Toys R Us, Mattel, Hasbro, Leapfrog, Hilton, Days Inn, Holiday Inn, MGM, 7-Eleven, by the way, very good friends of ours, the family. Actually, we're meeting them next month in Dallas at a family office conference. Circle K, Humana, Safeway, Occidental Petroleum, Macau Cellular Communications that basically started, I think, the the entire cellular industry. His impact, and by the way, when, like you say, people talk about the LBOs, the leverage buyouts that basically put people out of work, and the RJR comes into the game. But actually, he helped build companies. I see here the Economy of Nevada, or Harrah's Entertainment and Park Place that brought 600,000 jobs. MGM Mirage, Mandalay Resorts. I don't. Oh, it keeps on going. Sorry. AMC, Bally's Manufacturing, Barnes and Noble, Beatrice, Caesar's World, Calvin Klein, Duracell. These are the companies they helped throughout the years. K Jewelers, and I'm just picking because the list is longer. Knowles, Mellon Bank, Sunrise Mining. This is a very, very respected list of companies that some of them are basically opened new industries that we all know today.
Well, you're also talking about the term junk bond. Now, this was a junk. People used to say to me today, why did you allow the term junk bond be used? Number one, I wish I had that power that I could decide one way or the other. But even the people that were intimately involved in the day-to-day trading, by calling it junk bond, you suggested that they were doing something that was beneath, the establishment. And so I talked to people who've read the book that said, when I came out of school in the 80s, I went to work at this established firm on Wall Street or that established firm on Wall Street. And they basically said, we're never getting in that business. That's below us. We don't finance those kind of companies. That's not what we do. But because of the fact that he was disrupting the world, calling him the junk bond king made it sound like he was doing something that the establishment should not participate in. So it was an unfortunate, but it's what happens when you're a disruptor. You see it today. You see with the new technologies and new industries, the head of those industries, how they're under constant scrutiny by Congress, by the SEC, et cetera. Whether it's social media companies. You see Facebook. When Bill Gates was under investigation by the Justice Department, it was not a criminal investigation, but the Justice Department was looking at what was going at Microsoft. You see how much news today Elon Musk gets. These are all disruptors. They're all individuals. Each one of their stories is different. They're not necessarily the same as Mike's was, but they're all disruptors. And we know that disruptors have enemies or have people that want to stop them from what they are doing.
And unlike Musk, he kept a very low profile, which upset people even more. He wouldn't talk, he wouldn't do interviews, he would be very kind and avoid confrontations, not what they would have wanted. So he was a great target for everybody to go after, the media and the government. And I think one of the points you talk about is the fact that if the government wants you, you're in a very, very serious problem because they're going to get you either way. And I think one of the points you mentioned, you quoted here, because at the end of the day, when they found some technicalities to go after, you mentioned Attorney General Robert Jackson said in the law book, and filled with great assortments of crimes. And the law books are filled with a great assortments of crimes. Because they have the rules of, millions of rules they can look at, and a prosecutor can choose his or her defendants and have a fair chance of finding a technical violations on the part of almost anyone. And so basically, at the end of the day, that was really what they managed to really prosecute him for. At the end of the day, what he agreed to admit. And even that you mentioned was done because he was trying to just put this behind him and just to be left alone and mitigate the damages that already are happening.
So let's talk a little bit, Danny, about the process, because I said one of the reasons I wrote the book so people could understand the process. So when this process started, I had been out of law school for 13 years. I went to one of the top law schools in the United States. I was very fortunate that I would have that opportunity to do that at UCLA Law School. Then I practiced law for 10 years. When this case started, I was of the belief, with all my background and everything else, that the criminal justice system was like the civil litigation system. If you came under investigation, they must have a good reason. And if you were innocent, you'd have plenty of chances to show it. Just like if you were sued in a civil case, you could take a deposition, everybody would be in the same room. Whatever documents they got through discovery, you could get through discovery. It was a level playing field. What I soon learned, and I was totally naive, I had no idea at the time, that's not how the criminal justice system works at all. All the power, all the rights rest with the government until you are indicted. By the time you're indicted, you're like on your own 2 yard line, since the Super Bowl just happened a couple of days ago. Starting it's third down and 20, and you're on your own 2 yard line. That is really the analogy. So to give an example, the investigation starts. The prosecutors have the grand jury. They could subpoena, as they subpoenaed us. They could subpoena your documents. They could get any document you have. They could subpoena anyone's documents. You, as the subject of the investigation, have no right to see what they subpoena. They could take depositions or take testimony under oath in front of a grand jury. That's in a closed room where the witness isn't even allowed to have their lawyer in the room. The lawyer could be outside if they want to go ask the lawyer a question, but they're questioned under oath. You, as a person under investigation or being investigated, have no right to see any of those depositions or any of that testimony until after you've been indicted. Okay? So all the powers with the government. Why do they have this power? Because you want to be able to put away bad guys. You are relying on prosecutors, and there are many honest, probably most, they're all, I'm not saying that prosecutors are dishonest. All I'm saying is they have power and they're trained to win cases. They're trained to be right. They believe that if a person's under investigation, they must have done something. That's how most of them are trained. Now, you quoted Robert Jackson, former Attorney General. In that quote that you made, he is addressing prosecutors, federal prosecutors, and he is telling them their job is to make sure justice is done. The United States Supreme Court, in a case called Berger, stated that a prosecutor's job is to see that justice is done, that the guilty are punished, and those that are innocent go free. That is their job. It is not to win cases. But that's not the way the process works in high-profile cases. High-profile cases bring a lot of attention to the prosecutor. And a prosecutor often can make their career by winning a high-profile case. So they do their work using their power to try to win the case. They could use it dishonestly, but most of them don't. It's just they're trained to believe that the person they're going after must have done something wrong, and that's what they're going after. So we were subjected before the plea to this case started in 1986. So this case, for almost 4 years, we were subjected to intense scrutiny in the media because the prosecutors and the prosecutors that came to my class admitted this, leaked information to the press. They didn't say that they personally did it, but they knew by looking at the information that was leaked from the press that it had to come from government sources. And they acknowledged that is wrong. It's not fair. It shouldn't happen. But it happened. This was the only case of its time that was in the media before a decision was made to indict somebody. So Mike came under intensive pressure. He's being vilified in the press. As you said, he was media shy as he was developing his business. He didn't talk to the media. So he became defined by the media as a person very different than he is. In addition, one of the tools that these prosecutors used in this case, and the prosecutor in the case, the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York at the time, which was in charge of this case, was Rudy Giuliani, okay, who was an ambitious, politically motivated prosecutor. Edward Bennett Williams, who we hired initially and unfortunately passed away from cancer, was the probably best known by far defense lawyer of his time. He said to me, Rudy Giuliani is the biggest piece of political meat I've seen since Thomas Dewey. Thomas Dewey was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, had political ambitions. He later became the governor of New York and ran for president of the United States against Harry Truman. Okay. Mr. Giuliani became a very effective mayor of New York, and we know had presidential ambitions at the time. So now we had a case that was getting a lot of attention. It was in a prosecutor's interest to be successful in this case. And you have Mike being beat up. They bring the case under the racketeering statute, which was really not devised to go after financial institutions. Ed Williams said that that's not what it's for at all, but that's what Giuliani would do. And they also investigated and indicted Michael's brother, who worked with him at Drexel, but had nothing to do with the transactions they were looking at. And it was admitted to me later that he was under investigation solely to bring pressure on his brother. So when everybody was making deals with the government, I guess that's another part of what the government power is. They could go to a witness and say to that witness, we're investigating this transaction. You were involved in the transaction. We think X, Y, and Z happened, which is illegal. If you can help us, we will give you immunity. If you can help us, we will make sure that you have no downside from helping us. And if you can't help us, fine. But if we later find you were involved, we're going to indict you with Michael Milken under the RICO statute, the racketeering statute. And you'll go to jail for a long time and you're going to lose all your assets. That's the power they have. If I went to that same person and said, you work with Mike, your bonus is coming up. This is how we remember the transaction. We really believe this. If you can help us, it will be in your best interest. I'm going to be indicted for obstruction of justice. So it's not a level playing field. So all the power rests with the government in a criminal prosecution, which I did not understand when this thing started. And they have this tremendous power that most prosecutors probably exercise that power in a fair and just manner, realizing what the responsibilities are.
And
But
you mentioned, I'm sorry, and you mentioned that maybe Milken would have gotten away with it if he would have collaborated with them because they wanted him to also bring down other people, which he refused to do. And you even describe at one point, which is almost like bullying, really, but under the law, when Reed Fiegel, assistant legal attorney, suggests with a kind recommendation to Mr. Milken to talk about Thomas Spiegel, I believe, and mentioning that if he will collaborate, then good things will happen. And you write here exactly that point: the ability to suggest to witnesses how they could help the government was a weapon prosecutors had at their disposal. If I approached the witness, like you said, and told him I believed it happened, and told him I could help him if he could testify that way, I would be indicted for obstruction of justice. And I believe that so the prosecutor can tell the witness not to lie, but if the witness happens to tell the prosecutor what the prosecutor wants to hear by coincidence, then the witness is rewarded. So he didn't tell Milken, let's take Thomas Spiegel down and you tell, say this and that. But if you would say that, then that's great because, which is, it sounds illegal a little bit to me.
and you got to understand, again, as I said before, it's not that prosecutor necessarily believes they're doing anything wrong. They're trained to believe that they are supposed to get this person and the person actually did something wrong. They don't start off with the idea of we're seeking truth, we're seeking to win. So when I say that the Supreme Court and Attorney General Jackson indicated that the job is to see that justice is done, many of them are trained, especially in high profile cases, to believe that justice means that person that's under investigation, we got to find out what they did wrong and let their lawyer represent them. We're representing the government and we're trying to win and they're trying to win. What they don't appreciate or not trained often to appreciate is it's not a level playing field. So to say that their lawyer, I remember Ed Williams said to me, I will give the prosecutors all the resources that I have in my law firm if they give me the grand jury. Okay. They have all the power, but you've got to understand these prosecutors are young kids. They're people in their late 20s. They go to the best law schools. They're smart. They're ambitious. They're naive. They don't have lifetime experiences. They don't really appreciate the effect of if they're wrong, what does it mean? They never ask themselves, what if they're wrong? They're going after a high profile individual why is this person in my office? Why am I investigating Michael Milken? You know, he's making a lot of money. He went to an Ivy League school. When I came into the prosecutor's office, I was doing drug cases. I was investigating people that had none of those privileges and that didn't make any money. And now I'm investigating this guy made all this money. So you're giving all this power to a young, ambitious prosecutor who knows that it's expected that they be successful, and they never ask the question of what if I'm wrong? And that's the problem. They're dealing with human beings. And one of the prosecutors that came to my class indicated the fact that when he was a young prosecutor, he didn't know anything about securities law. He'd come from really prosecuting drug cases, narcotics cases. He knew nothing about who Michael Milken was, didn't know a bond from a stock, and felt that it was his job to be successful because the office had an investment in this case. They made a deal with Mr. Boski. They gave him the right to plead to a very minor felony, even though he had engaged in blatant insider trading, paying cash to people for information. They made the deal because he was going to make cases. Their job was to take those cases he was going to give them and be successful. And that's how they're trained. So it's not like we got a prosecutorial system that everybody's dishonest. It's just there's so much power in young people, and there's no downside. It's the last point, and I'll let you go on, Danny. I'm sorry, I know I'm going on a
No, no,
little here. But at the end of the case, had Mike gone well, it's anybody, but had Mike gone to trial and been successful, he still would have his reputation tarnished. He'd been in the newspapers for years. He'd been indicted, okay, for different things. His reputation would be tarnished no matter what. You can't get it back. There was a member, I believe, of the Nixon cabinet who was accused of a crime and went to trial and won and was asked as he left the courtroom, do you feel vindicated now? And his answer was, you tell me what office I go to get my reputation back. The prosecutorial system and the U.S. attorney who's in charge of the office is really the one who's responsible. They have no downside. They win, it helps their career. They lose, they go on to the next case. There's no downside. The person that gets indicted has no upside. If they win, their reputation is tarnished. They probably have lost their position in the community or in their business, so they got to start all over again. And if they lose their freedom. You know, it's a very tough system.
And why do you think throughout this process, the government was really out to get him and doing above and beyond everything? I mean, even after he agreed to what he agreed, they went on writing letters about more issues that should be discussed, trying to make sure that he gets the worst outcome possible, writing the judge, really trying hard. And even after everything was done, they were going after him or trying to go after him for his consultancy work that he had to give away the fees there as well, just to be to have them leave him alone. It's like, I mean, why? He was already convicted. They got what they wanted. Why did they? Where that passion to keep on going after the guy comes from?
So let's talk about, since I think it's one of the big misunderstandings out there for people who study Mike Milken and such, what did he do? What did he plead to? So when he decided that he wanted to cut his losses and he wanted to explore the ability of eliminating the risk of going to prison, maybe even getting indicted again, because if he'd won here, maybe they're going to indict him on something else, which they did to other people. So they said, okay, you don't have to make cases. At first it was you have to make cases against others. Well, Mike he didn't live that kind of life. He didn't do that kind of business where he was doing things illegally to make cases against others. And he wasn't going to make up a story as others have done in the past. So we sat down with the prosecutors. They said, okay, if he pleads to 6 things and if he pays the money and if he does this, we'll consider it. And we actually found regulatory violations, most of which had never been subject of even a civil proceeding, let alone a criminal. None of them had ever been subject of a criminal proceeding that they said, okay, that's a technical violation. You could plead to that. And that's what he pled to. Just to give an example, aiding and abetting the false filing of a 13D. Now, a 13D is a filing you make with the SEC when you own 5% of the stock. Client of Mike's had 5% of a certain stock, asked Mike what he thought of it. He said, well, you read what I read. The person who said he's going after this company appears serious to me. Probably not a bad investment. No inside information traded. Person never went after, never bought the company, never did what he said he'd do. The client came back, in this case, Mr. Boski, to Mike Milken, it's your fault. You told me I should buy this. You should, and started hounding him. Mike, being very non-confrontational, said, fine. If you lose money on this, which I don't think you will, but if you do, I'll make it up to you some down the road. Didn't say I'm going to write you a check. I'm not going to give you cash. I'll find an investment for you down the road. Technically, you could argue the person should have amended their 13D to indicate they had this side agreement with Mike. Okay. So aiding and abetting another person and not amending their 13D is not something that anybody in history has ever been accused of, or certainly not prosecuted for. These were the nature of the technicalities he pled to. So the government was upset that, when I say the SEC was upset, even certain prosecutors were upset that he pled to these technical things. We stated in our sentencing proceeding with the judge that these were highly technical things that had never been prosecuted before. And they wanted him to admit that he'd done much more serious things. And they accused him in the sentencing process of having done much more serious things. The judge held a hearing, said, show me he did anything else, and I will sentence him based on the other things you say he did. And they gave the government 20 hours to pick anything in their entire investigation that they wanted to show her that he did. And they brought in witnesses, and they failed. She ruled that they failed, that he did anything else. So in order to protect themselves in saying those things, they wanted Mike to admit other things that he never did. So they kept coming every time they saw his name appear on anything where they thought they might have a reason to go after him for a securities law violation. They was open an investigation. There were 2 or 3 of these investigations. None of them ever went anywhere because there was nothing there. Okay. But this was, why did they do it? I don't know. You tell me.
And there were 2 people that you didn't speak to at the book. I read some articles that said that maybe it's because even when one of them is Giuliani, of course, which Mr. Milken ended up meeting, and he ended up also helping him a little bit at the end with a pardon from President Trump. But it seems like he forgave, and he was helping him when he was dealing with cancer. We'll talk about that soon. And he met with him. And if reading between the lines seems like you have, and like it was such a trauma, this whole thing, that somehow maybe you never really wanted to talk to Giuliani about anything else because you were so how did you feel about that?
So I read that in one review. They said journalistically could have talked to this person, could have talked to that person. As I said earlier on, Danny, this is a factual book based upon what I know directly from my participation on a daily basis in this case. It's based on court documents. It's based upon the class that I taught and the people that came to the class and talked to the students, and I transcribed the class. And I didn't go out and interview anybody for this book because I'm not so sure I'm really interested in what they have to say to protect themselves 30 years later. I know what they did 30 years ago or 35 years ago. I know what the process was. I know what I experienced. Okay. So I wasn't looking to provide a vehicle for others to make excuses for themselves or not make excuses for themselves. I don't know. So, as I said, I went about this. I didn't interview anybody, I didn't interview Michael Milken. I didn't discuss the book with him. People have a hard time understanding that or believing that. He didn't review any drafts of the book. All right. This is my story based on what I know to be factual and true. And I back up everything that's in the book with the facts as I present them in the book.
And one of the interesting things that you also didn't address, and you don't think we should, but I think it's interesting a little bit to bring that angle. You know, there were two powers, the government and the media, that somehow got leaked. You know, the information was leaked to the media throughout this throughout the years then during the trial, and everybody that's been to finance or even business read Den of Thieves and Mr. Stewart's book that you basically are saying when you and I spoke, you had a lot to say about that, about things that he wrote and things he promised you that ended up a little bit different. And the reason I mention it is because it's one of the most popular books out there, and he did write. It was well written, and I would love to hear what you have to say about that. And I know it came as another blow to Michael when it came out, and another blow, another guy making his career on this story.
So look at Mr. Stewart was a journalist. He had no direct knowledge of anything that's in his book. He wrote a book about what people told him. He covered the story. I believe he had an interest in Mike being guilty because that was consistent with the story, because he actually covered it from the government point of view. But when he sat down to write his book, he reached out to us. And at that point, we figured there was no downside, and I met with Mr. Stewart. He says in his book, he says, I think it's in the foreword of the book, he says that I interviewed hundreds of people to write this book. And if there was a discrepancy between two people's stories on a particular topic, I decided based upon my reporting which one I thought was the most credible and the truth. And that's what I put in the book. And I put the other version in the end notes of the book. Okay, there are end notes of the book, which probably all the people you say read the book probably didn't read the end notes, but it doesn't matter. So he says, that's what I did. He says that in the foreword of the book. And he says the biggest discrepancy in two stories between people were between Mr. Milken and Mr. Boesky. That was the biggest discrepancy. And I chose to believe Mr. Boesky because he had pled already. And then Mr. Milken first said he was innocent and then pled guilty. So that's what he says in his book. Now, when he met with me, he said, I want Mr. Milken's side of the story on these transactions, and I will put it in the book. I want my readers to make up their own mind. I could even call the book Make Up Your Own Mind. Well, that's hardly what happened, okay? Number one, as he said in the foreword of the book, he did not intend for the readers to make up their own mind. He decided who was telling the truth. And he also said that he told me he'd put everything in the book. He not only didn't put everything I told him in the book, but the things he even referred to in the end notes that I said were very much truncated. But in addition to that, he indicated in the foreword of the book that everyone mentioned in the book was interviewed or had a chance to be interviewed on the subject that they were discussed in the book. I am mentioned in his book, I don't know, over 20 times. He says things about me in the book that are not true. He interviewed me twice. He never once asked me one question about anything he ever said to me about me in the book. So that, again, I'm just, again, talking factually. That is my experience with the book. Have I read the book? Yes, of course I had to read the book. Is the book well written? He's a good writer, very well written. It's a really good story. It's just not true. It's from one person's point of view that he wanted to tell, and he did not fairly give an opportunity for us to respond, because even on the things he asked me about, he didn't put in the book.
And it's actually interesting to show this short interview here from CNBC, because that was several years ago, before you wrote your book, obviously. And about
Michael Milken, the former junk bond king, spent years in prison for violating securities law. Today, he's a prominent philanthropist. Joining us now is Jim Stewart, the New York Times. He's also a CNBC contributor. He also wrote the best-selling book on big insider trading scandals on Wall Street in the 80s called Den of Thieves. And I haven't talked to you I haven't pre-interviewed you, Jim, on this, but I was in the business back then. I almost thought about going to Drexel. I always thought that Milken changed the world in ways for the better. I thought parking stock was not an egregious. I don't even know if at the time whether he was absolutely aware that qualified for jail time compared to Boesky or Marty Siegel or some of these true, guys carrying suitcases full of money to get inside information. I think the Journal talks about it being, going after Wall Street greed in an era that caused prosecutors to be overzealous. One of which, Giuliani, he was doing it for a reason. He wanted to become mayor, which he did, and he inspired the LoveGov to become the
Talking about Spitzer now.
Yeah, well, everybody knows the LoveGov.
Not everybody.
Inspired him to make his political hay by doing the same thing. Am I wrong that Milken was a positive for society and finance?
Well, I'm not disputing the fact that Milken did a tremendous amount on Wall Street.
Of good?
Good and bad. And I mean, I've never had any quibble with junk bonds. Junk bonds in and of themselves are fine. They're thriving today. But they were misused in that era. And I guess the point I would really stress is that the Justice Department did a very thorough investigation of this case. Judges oversaw it. I quoted Judge Kimball Wood, who sentenced him, talking about how serious these issues were. These particular crimes did create a tremendous amount of collateral damage. I don't think Milken intended that, but that's true of many white-collar crimes. And I think another important issue is that I find very troubling about this particular pardon is the whole point of having Milken go to jail, or any white-collar criminal for that matter, it's not that they're going to go out in society and, like commit a violent crime or something, need to be in jail. It's the deterrent factor. It's to deter other people from doing similar things.
You would say net that the collateral damage from what Milken did is a net negative versus giving financing to I mean, how many companies could issue bonds before Milken? There were like 20 or 30 companies in the entire universe
this cosmic idea doesn't get...
Yeah, this goes on and on, but this is amazing. I mean, because this book influenced people's minds in generations, and if you should see this interview all the way, but basically the interviewer is asking him, what are you talking about?
Well, it's interesting that he talked about the tremendous collateral damage, because as part of the process the judge went through is she assessed the economic effect of everything Michael pled to. She did an assessment. Now, don't forget, he pled to 5 transactions, doing things that, as I say, were highly technical, never before or since prosecuted, regulatory violations at the most. Interesting enough, a number of the things he said that he pled to had to do with telling someone, okay, somewhere down the line, I'll make it up to you. A judge in a related case to the Drexel case concluded that saying to somebody, I'll make it up to you, is not a violation because it's not enforceable. Okay, it's not a guarantee, and there was nothing illegal about the way they supposedly made it up. But putting that aside, let's go back to what the judge did when she assessed the economic damage. Out of the 5 transactions, she found 4 of the transactions had a total economic effect of 0. 0, okay? And one of the transactions, which had to do with non-disclosure of commissions that had been approved by Drexel's management, but they were not disclosed on the, I talk about how technical they are, they weren't disclosed on the confirms that were mailed, that those commissions added up to $318,082, 312, something like that. So this tremendous collateral damage is $300,000 of non-disclosed commissions, where everything else he pled to, the judge who sentenced him, who reviewed the case, who held the little mini trial called the Fatico hearing, concluded had a 0 economic effect. That same judge wrote a letter to the Parole Commission indicating that she had held a hearing and allowed the government to choose anything else they wanted to show that Mike Milken did wrong, and they failed. And she did not believe that they could prove that he had done anything beyond what he pled to, which is quite unusual. Everybody assumes you plead to something far less than what you did, okay? In this case, you have the judge saying, hey, I held a hearing. They couldn't show me he did anything other than what he pled to. And don't forget, one of the things we did not mention, when he did settle with the government and agreed to plead and settle with the SEC, the government, to encourage him to go along, because we were wrestling with whether to do this, came in at the end and said they would drop all charges against his brother. The Southern District of New York doesn't do that in a high-profile case. To me, it was an acknowledgement of why his brother was investigated and indicted in the first place.
And I mean, I have lots of questions that hopefully we can do it at another session. But after all this decades of sleepless nights and everything he went through, and the fact they didn't let him go even when he was out, I mean, he was really a target for these guys and the media, which is why it was so refreshing to see an interview like this one. Somebody who actually knew the facts and didn't let him get away. He said, no, 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 I know exactly what you're talking about. This is not right. I know what I'm talking about. I've seen other interviews with people where the people didn't even know the basics of the story and they were just getting the big headlines. And so we all know, you know, how much Milken has done since with the Milken Institute and the conferences and the philanthropy in so many places. I think this is one of the things that really helped him as well, that was taken into consideration. And he had cancer eventually, which you think prostate cancer, where he was told he has a year or so to live. And throughout the book, you describe him as a person that gets knocked down, takes the dust off, and comes again positively without hating anybody, just keeps on going no matter what happens to him. And of course, we know that he won that as well against the odds of the doctors. And you think this was a result of what the manhunt that was going on?
Yeah, look at I
as well.
I talked to Mike every day during this period. I visited him when he was at the prison camp, you know, multiple times a week. I talked to him even from there almost every day because you're allowed to call lawyers and such. And there was no question of how upset he was, how frustrated he was, that he was accused of so many things. He was depicted as a person who could not have been more removed from the person that he is, and he, you know, and has always been. And so I always feel like he imploded. Since he never exploded, he must have imploded. When I talked to his doctors, I said, does that make any sense? They said, yeah, it makes sense. I said, look, at your frustration, aggravation is very harmful to the system. And so do I know that that caused it? I don't know that. Okay. But fortunately, he does, as you said, Danny, he has this amazing ability to get knocked down, get up, dust himself off without bitterness. You have never heard him, since this happened to him, publicly talk about anybody in a negative fashion. He has not complained about the government. He's not complained. He just doesn't, I think it was too painful in many ways to talk about, but he gets up every day and he tries to improve the human condition. What he has done in medical research, especially with regard to cancer research, what his foundations have done with respect to education, along with the work of his brother Lowell, you know, all of this that he has done is how he conducts himself every day. He did it before this happened. He's done it since this has happened. And that's one of the things I admire greatly about him, is he's very productive in what he does every day and doesn't let anything stop him.
And we talk about him, but a couple of words about you, really. You've written at the end of the book as well your sacrifice alongside. I mean, in one page out of didn't count how many hundreds, is about that. Your family paid a price, not only his family. Obviously, everybody was there. For years, you missed your kids' birthdays, events. You were with him. You were with the government. What was the toll that this was taking on you, and what have you learned from it? And looking back, you know, was it worth it? That's the question you ask.
Well, as I say in the book, it was worth it. I have tremendous respect for my friends. Okay, these people are my friends. I think they have tremendous respect for me as their friend. We did for each other because we care about each other, what we can to help each other. We've done that for each other throughout our lives. It was difficult. We have families. This is one of the things I said earlier that young prosecutors don't even think about. What's the effect on somebody's family? What if I'm wrong on this situation? I missed one birthday and promised myself I would never do that again. Because at the end of the day, the person that suffered the most from me missing that is me. I missed a event in one of my children's life. Fortunately, I have incredible children. I have an incredible wife, as does Mike. They carried on. They made sure that the kids had what they needed. They knew they were cared for. But it had an effect on them too. Their parents were away a lot. And they were too young to really understand everything then. I think they understand it better today. But it does take a toll. And I think we all have to make decisions in life, always putting our families first. And like I said, fortunately, I have a spouse who was able to stand there, and I was still able to be there when I could be there. But I knew that they were cared for, and they've all turned out to be outstanding individuals and contribute to society. And I'm very proud of that. So I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm sorry we had to do it. Okay. But we've survived it. We're luckier than most. Most people go through this process, don't have the resources we had, don't have the families that we have. Okay. That's part of what the book's about. It's a very difficult process.
And maybe just one last remark that we have here from one of our families here. Based on Michael Milken's experience with the justice systems, not ideal from his and your perspective, what initiatives are you taking to help make a difference for white collar and other defendants? Seems like great learning that can be used for the good of all, for the good of our justice system across the US, state and federal. And in follow-up, how should the conduct of lawyers and prosecutors be shaped in law schools and through regulations to ensure that abuses of power are limited?
Okay, outstanding question. One of the things I'm very focused in is really one of the main reasons I wrote this book is to get it into law schools and to get it into business schools. And part of my focus is to work with professors that teach the topic, whether it's white collar crime or finance, where they do teach parts of this subject. And they might even recommend some of the books you mentioned earlier. I want this to be part of the curriculum, and I'm going to work very hard during this next year to go to some of the major schools to do that and volunteer to come and speak to the schools. I did do an event at my alma mater law school at UCLA for the law school and business school. But that is my goal. My goal is to get the schools to understand, to get the young lawyers who are going to be prosecutors to understand their responsibility and the power that they actually have. I mean, you're giving tremendous power to young people that really don't understand the effects of the power that they have. They learn that later in life when it's a little too late for that person that they went after when they were a young prosecutor.
It's an amazing story. It's an amazing book. I loved it. And Richard, I had the pleasure of having you speak at our West Coast Family Office Conference we held a couple of months ago with other great families that were there. Yeah, I mean, for those of you who don't know us, we're putting on family office gatherings all around the world in 16 cities. We'd like to talk about different topics from estate planning to next generation to philanthropy. And it was a pleasure having you speak there in LA. And I really hope that you'll join us in person in other locations to talk more about this and other related topics. And anything else you would like to add at this point?
No, I think you were very thorough. I think we covered the topics. Other than thank you for what you do, Denny, and for bringing topics like this to the people that are following what you're doing at DC Finance. And I consider it an honor that you have included me with a lot of those other names and those people that I saw at that beginning video. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank everybody that's listening for their interest. And I hope that you find the book of interest. I put a lot of, as I said, many, many years and blood, sweat, and tears into it. But I'm very comfortable with the book and with the accuracy of it. And I could only tell the story as it really happened. I couldn't do anything else.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Richard, for all of this. For everybody else, this is being recorded, so you will be able to see the recording. I saw somebody was asking that. And I'll just mention that our next meeting is in Dallas on the 19th at the Bush Presidential Center, with speakers like Joshua Gentin, the third gen of Sargento, the cheese manufacturer. James Case was the chairman of 7-Eleven that we talked about, and Blockbuster, Marianne Thompson Frank, the daughter of Mr. Thompson, that was the second gen, I think, of 7-Eleven. Drayton McLean, Eustace Astros, Clara, who's the next generation of Sonic, the fast food chain. And 2 days later, we're in Houston. And for those of you who heard, we also launched, this is the Houston event 2 days later. And finally, we've launched a club just for families that is chaired by Lisa Silverstein of the Silverstein family, the owners of the World Trade Center. And if anybody would want more information, let us know. Richard, thank you so much. And all the great work you do, the Jewish Federation, the different philanthropic work you do in different areas. And of course, Michael, for what he's doing and how he advanced so many different areas. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you soon in person.
Look forward to it, Denny, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, and thank everybody for their time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.